What occurs when the daughter of one of the most divisive pastors in gospel music makes the decision to finally speak her mind? In reality, what is it like to grow up surrounded by cameras, bright lights, and the church world's unrelenting criticism? We're delving further into Deitrick Haddon's daughter's moving and poignant story today, and what she shared about growing up in the spotlight could fundamentally alter your perception of both her father and celebrity in general, because few people have ever heard this side of the story, which lies beneath the glamour, the gospel CDs, and the sermons. You'll discover that not everything that gleams beneath the church lights is gold after you do. Keep listening, because what she revealed will make you reevaluate everything you believe to be true about the family behind the pulpit and gospel aristocracy, known for his powerful voice, unvarnished honesty, and the kind of daring that made him both adored and hated throughout the Christian community. Deitrick Haddon's name reverberates through gospel music. His life has been a public testament full of highs, lows, and a good deal of controversy, from preachers in Los Angeles to the pulpit. However, this is not, at least not in its entirety, about Deitrick. This time, his daughter, who never requested it, is the center of attention. She has been spotted grinning in family portraits, making appearances in videos, and standing silently next to her well-known father for years. What was going on behind those smiles, though? What was it like to have a famous and preaching father while you were growing up? Someone who is under constant scrutiny from the media and the church. Discover what Deitrick Haddon's daughter eventually said about her early years in this video. The emotional toll, pressure, and expectations that come with growing up in the spotlight of gospel fame. We'll look at how her identity was influenced by her celebrity, her personal struggles, and the lessons she took away from seeing her father deal with controversy, atonement, and public scrutiny. You'll learn about the emotional toll of being the pastor's child in the spotlight, the startling events she saw as a child growing up in a society where fame and faith clashed the moment she made the decision to speak up, and why so many people who grew up in similar homes are now finding resonance in her words. So, have a seat, because this narrative is much more than what you've ever heard in the headlines or tabloids. The truth she shared and how it reflects on the hidden realities of life behind the pulpit will astound you. Let's take a quick look back to see where it all started before delving into her story. Before you even learn how to spell your last name, imagine being born into a family where everyone knows it. Deitrick Haddon's kid was surrounded by cameras, microphones, and expectations from the minute she was born. Her dad is no ordinary man. He was a preacher, a lightning rod for debate, and a legend in the gospel. Thus, her life was not private from the start. It belonged to the public. Childhood is a time of freedom, errors, and discovery for many of us. Everything, however, arrived with a cautious eye for her, not only from her parents, but also from the media and the Christian community. Every Instagram post, church function, and family photo was more than just a snapshot. It was a statement. Perfection was expected. Additionally, the pressure is felt differently when your father is Deitrick Haddon. She reportedly discussed behind the scenes what it was like to be continuously referred to as Deitrick's daughter. She received distinct treatment from her teachers at school. More than her personality, friends were interested in her father's celebrity. Even churchgoers would discuss family rumors that became viral online in whispers, comments, or improper questions. She was more than a child. She embodied her father's reputation in every way. Deitrick's daughter grew up watching her father's ascent, his hardships, and his public failures. She witnessed what it was like to live under continual scrutiny from his well-reported scandals, which included his departure from conventional church leadership duties and his audacious reality TV appearances. Despite her youth, she sensed the tension in every social media post, sermon, and headline. She occasionally questioned whether people loved her for who she was or whether they only wanted to be associated with her father, according to those close to the family. Feeling that your value is dependent on someone else's celebrity is a tremendous weight for a child. However, despite everything, Deitrick made an effort to keep his kids grounded. Despite his fame, he frequently discusses in interviews the value of allowing his children to lead normal lives. He urged them to discover their own voice, their own religion, and their own identity. However, it was difficult to escape the reality of living in a gospel dynasty. Attending one of her father's concerts and witnessing the audience sob, yell, and reach for him as though he were more than just a man is said to have been one of the most memorable moments in her recollection. A child finds that perplexing. While the world views her father as a prophet, a celebrity, and a symbol, you see him as a parent. Emotional distance might occasionally result from that disconnect. She once alluded to the fact that she occasionally wished her father wasn't so famous. There were moments when all she wanted was to be a member of a typical family, to enter a church without anyone noticing, and to go out to supper without anyone ogling or questioning her. But when the cameras stop rolling, stardom doesn't stop. The problem with being a preacher's kid, especially in the spotlight, is that, along with the benefits, you also inherit the criticism. Every error you make and every statement you make could end up in the news or as the subject of rumors. And that pressure only increased with her age. Because your story isn't unique when you're the daughter of a man like Deitrick Haddon, it's carrying on a tradition. However, what occurs if that legacy begins to resemble a cage rather than a crown? Her tale changes at that point, the instant she realized the distinction between finding her own light and living in the spotlight. However, she had to go through some difficult times that most people never saw before coming to that knowledge. From the outside, it appeared flawless. The social media posts, family photos, and music all depicted a happy, blessed family under the direction of one of the most vibrant voices in gospel. Deitrick Haddon's daughter was quietly bearing the emotional burden of it all, despite the lights, cheers, and the well-preserved ministry image. You see, being in the spotlight as a child exposes you to more than just fame. It makes you vulnerable to criticism. Every action you perform is scrutinized, every error amplified. Adolescence is difficult enough for most children, but for her, flaws were unacceptable. She was a gospel icon's daughter, and it meant having to live up to unachievable expectations established by both critics and admirers. She once thought about how it was to have to grin all the time, even when she didn't feel like it. Must seem calm, courteous, and like a pastor's daughter at all times, even when she was crying on the inside. She was supposed to be a walking advertisement for her father's ministry, the epitome of obedience, grace, and faith. However, what no one saw were the restless nights, the self-doubt, and the fear of always being judged, not only by others but also by a standard of perfection that she would never be able to meet. She occasionally had the impression that she was leading two lives, one behind closed doors and one in front of the cameras. She was Deitrick's daughter, beaming for pictures and shaking hands with fans on stage or at church. She was a little child at home, however, attempting to make sense of her father's celebrity, the internet rumors, and the pressure of public opinion on her family. Subsequently, there were rumors and whispers that no youngster should ever have to hear. Deitrick wasn't the only one who had to deal with the fallout from his ministry and personal choices. The pain of every headline was felt by his family, particularly his daughter. Adults at church would provide empathetic glances or condemning stares when children at school brought up things they had seen online and asked, "Is that true about your dad?" And the noise intruded, despite her best efforts to ignore it. As she grew older, this emotional strain started to increase. She became increasingly aware of how different people's perceptions of her family were as she gained more knowledge about the world. Some viewed them as uplifting examples of how God's grace can heal and restore. However, there were also people who never forgot, never showed forgiveness, and never missed an opportunity to bring up their history. It's not just the critics either. It's the isolation that accompanies being in the spotlight. It's difficult to find true friendship when you're famous by association. Beyond the attention that comes with your last name, how can you tell who truly cares about you? She had been carrying that question for years. She apparently revealed how much she struggled with her identity in an emotional moment posted online. She felt as though she was always striving to prove herself and leave her father's shadow, but she was scared of what that could look like. Being recognized yet ununderstood can lead to a profound form of fatigue. The psychological struggle of belonging to a faith-based family that is frequently pushed to superhuman standards was another topic she covered. People presume that your faith must be flawless simply because your father is a preacher, that you never question, doubt, or fall. In actuality, though, she acknowledged that she had experienced times when she felt cut off from God. There were times when she couldn't comprehend why a family trying to do the right thing had to face such hardships. Silent challenges like these aren't publicized on Instagram. They are genuine, unvarnished, and profoundly human, the kind that don't make the news on gospel channels. For his part, Deitrick has been candid about the difficulties of juggling fatherhood with preaching. He has acknowledged in previous interviews that fame doesn't always bring tranquility, and that the family suffers when he is in the spotlight. He has spoken of praying for his kids to know God for themselves, not through him, and to discover identity and strength outside of his name. However, as every parent is aware, no matter how much love you offer, you cannot protect your kids from the hurt caused by how other people see them. And his daughter became stronger but also more wary as a result of their quiet struggles. On some nights, she cried in private out of fear that her feelings would be interpreted as weakness. There were times when she wanted to yell at the critics, but she decided to be quiet instead. At one point, she questioned whether anyone would ever recognize her for who she really was, not as Deitrick's daughter, not as the pastor's child, but just as herself. And after a while, that silence was too much to bear. She eventually made the decision to speak up because of the mounting pressure, criticism, and expectations. She eventually gave her side of the tale, not to rebel or to belittle her father or her faith, because her family was the buzz of the town for years. However, nobody had ever paid much attention to her. When she eventually found her voice, her words would impact thousands of people who grew up like her and rock the gospel world. It wasn't for show when Deitrick Haddon's daughter eventually decided to speak up. It wasn't out of compassion. The reason for this was that she had been burdened by silence for too long. Her life had been molded by the stories of others for years. The rumors in church pews, the media headlines, her parents' history, and her father's music. She wanted to speak the truth now, though. It started very quietly. An emotional message on social media, one that began as a reflection and evolved into something far more profound. No one was attacked by her. She refrained from snapping. Rather, her voice was one of openness and silent power. She talked of her love for her father and the agony of being continuously scrutinized by others, as well as what it was like to grow up in the spotlight. She talked about the emotional ups and downs of being a preacher's kid in the public eye, being praised as a model daughter one day, and then chastised for her family's public struggles the next. Even though everyone knew her name, she said that there were moments when she felt invisible. She wrote that it's odd when people remember your face but don't know who you are. Her admission that she was unable to fully express herself for a long time was one of the most impactful aspects of her speech, that she was supposed to be holy, flawless, and unconcerned with the turmoil that frequently surrounded her father's work. She wasn't unconcerned, though. She claimed that she had been scared to display her humanity because she was a human. She talked about having identity issues, not only as a daughter, but also as a person attempting to figure out who she was outside of the Haddon title. It's easy to forget that every well-known singer, pastor, or superstar has a family who didn't deserve their notoriety. She disclosed that she had felt caught between two worlds for a large portion of her early years. The reality of who she was becoming, and the image the church wanted her to maintain. Her grace, however, was what really moved people. She spoke without resentment, even if it hurt. Her words were filled with affection. She expressed how much she loved her father and how much she respected his devotion to God, his skill, and his tenacity. However, she also admitted that there were emotional struggles associated with being his daughter. She remembered hearing the world condemn her father, seeing individuals she had previously trusted turn against him, and witnessing her father come under public scrutiny. She was unable to comprehend as a child why those who advocated forgiveness were frequently the most quick to pass judgment. She said that for a time, the inconsistency made her doubt her faith. However, rather of avoiding it, she made use of the suffering to develop her own conception of God, which is based on authenticity rather than perfection. Her statements then started to strike a chord with thousands of others, because it wasn't just her narrative. It told the tale of innumerable preachers, children, gospel artists, and everybody else who has ever had to live with expectations they didn't ask for. My father's gift is powerful, but sometimes it's difficult to be the child of someone whose calling impacts every aspect of your life, she said. People see the stage, the lights, the ministry, the music, but they don't see the tears, the pressure, or the confusion that comes with being raised in the middle of it all. While her message wasn't about placing blame, it was a wake-up call to the church community, a reminder that behind every famous pastor's smile, there are children navigating their own silent battles. Fans and followers flooded the comments, many saying they had never heard a pastor's kid speak so openly about their struggles, others saying they finally felt understood, and still others sharing that they too had grown up in church environments where grace was rarely extended but perfection was demanded. He told those around him that her voice symbolized the next generation of truth-tellers, young people who love God but aren't afraid to be transparent about their pain. Perhaps the most profound moment occurred when she concluded her message with these words, according to sources close to the family, who said he was deeply moved by her courage. One thing I learned from growing up in the spotlight is that God doesn't require perfection, He only requires honesty. That statement struck a different chord because it wasn't merely poetic, it was prophetic. It was the sound of healing, it was the sound of a daughter finding her own voice, it was the sound of a generation refusing to remain silent. I used to believe my light was too small in comparison to my dad's, but now I know that even small lights can change the darkness. As a result of her bravery, other preachers' children began posting their own stories on the internet. Some described their struggles with faith, identity, or public pressure, while others merely thanked her for being the voice they never had. Suddenly, this was about more than just Deitrick Haddon's daughter. It was about the reality that many ministry families deal with but hardly ever talk about. When news of Deitrick Haddon's daughter speaking out started to circulate online, the reactions were immediate and intense. It was about the cost of visibility, the loneliness of public faith, and the beauty that can arise when someone dares to tell the truth. But what did Deitrick himself think of all this? How did the man known for his boldness and transparency react when the same honesty came from his own child? While some were profoundly touched by her candor and commended her for having the guts to say what so many preacher kids could never say, others naturally started to speculate about what this meant for Deitrick himself. Was there conflict between father and daughter? Was this a rebellion? Or was it something more profound? A profound moment of truth between a father and his child that most people couldn't see from the outside. But one thing was evident almost immediately. Deitrick Haddon responded with love rather than anger. People who know Deitrick are aware that he has always been outspoken and has never shied away from difficult conversations, whether in his music, sermons, or reality TV appearances. Deitrick, who knew better than anyone that it is difficult to live under public scrutiny, chose to amplify his daughter's voice rather than silence her. Insiders close to the family say that Deitrick saw his daughter's words as a reflection of honesty, growth, and freedom, things he had always prayed for, rather than as disrespect or defiance. Deitrick discreetly addressed the matter in one of his live broadcasts, soon after her post went viral, saying without mentioning names that he was proud of his children for learning to use their voices. He also reportedly told those close to him, "I raised my kids to be real, not religious." That statement alone encapsulated his reaction perfectly. You could hear the emotion in his voice as he talked about the difficulties of fatherhood, about trying to protect his children while also allowing them to be themselves. We come from a generation that was taught to hide everything, to pretend everything's perfect. However, the new generation is breaking that curse, and they're not afraid to say, "I'm hurting" or "I'm healing." And I thank God for that. He continued by saying that as a father, his primary objective has always been to demonstrate unconditional love, not control. People assume that because you are a pastor, your kids have it easier, but they don't. They deal with pressure, judgment, and expectations while simply trying to be kids. "My calling is not threatened by my daughter's truth," he stated. It makes it whole. It's important to note that Deitrick has always been outspoken about his own personal failures and troubles. Because if what I preach doesn't work at home, then it doesn't work at all. That revelation stopped people in their tracks and was a rare display of honesty from a guy who is frequently presented as larger than life. His daughter's public opening was seen by him as a part of that same journey, not as a scandal, but as a testimony in progress. As he has acknowledged his own shortcomings, been judged by the church, and learned the hard way what grace truly means. In private, sources claim he expressed his pride in his daughter and reassured her that she owed no one perfection. He claimed that what mattered most was that she stayed true to herself and her relationship with God, and that this moment brought them closer than they had been in years. In a subsequent interview, Deitrick was asked how he manages his ministry and family life, and he answered honestly, "My daughter reminded me that our children need real parents, not flawless ones," and he emphasized that he encourages his kids to talk openly even when it's difficult. "It's not easy. I've made mistakes as a father and as a man, but I've also learned that transparency is healing." The idea that transparency and faith can coexist is something that many in the gospel world struggle with. He stated that in his home, truth is not punished but welcomed because that is where healing starts. For years, church culture has frequently promoted silence over honesty, but Deitrick and his daughter showed that this is not the case. Deitrick posted a few pictures of his family online, smiling, laughing, and just being normal after her post went viral. The captions were subtle but profound. Family isn't about image, it's about love, and love means listening, even when it hurts. This truth doesn't destroy faith, rather, it strengthens it. Support from fans poured into his comments, with many expressing inspiration at his handling of the situation. One user remarked, "This is what fatherhood looks like. It's refreshing to see a pastor who doesn't silence his children, but celebrates their growth." Another person added, "Not ego, not control, but grace." And that was really the essence of this moment. Deitrick and his daughter reportedly had a heart-to-heart talk behind the scenes. It wasn't easy. There were tears, apologies, and laughter. But one thing emerged clear through it all. Rather than igniting more controversy, the story started to shift towards something redemptive, a picture of a family learning, healing, and growing together. For Deitrick, it was another chance to live out what he's always preached: grace after judgment, love after pain, truth after silence. For his daughter, it was a potent affirmation that her voice mattered and that she didn't need to hide behind anyone else's story to find her own. Their love for one another was stronger than any miscommunication or public perception. But there's more to this story. The lesson this entire journey teaches is not just preachers' kids, but anyone who's ever felt trapped by expectations or silenced by fear. Ultimately, their interaction became more than just a family moment. It became a message to the world that no matter who you are or where you come from, your truth deserves to be heard.